Hola, buenas tardes, buenas noches, bienvenidos a todos los que os habéis conectado a estas horas. Bueno, según desde donde estéis, supongo que la mayoría estaréis en España, son las 8 de la tarde y bueno, hemos elegido este horario para empezar la actividad de la BAC 2023 para hacerlo compatible con el horario de Evan Leybourn, que ya está conectado, esperando que le llegue su turno. En Australia son las 6 de la mañana. Y bueno, para él es un madrugón, para nosotros es un poquito tarde, pero bueno, pues entre todos hacemos la media. En cualquier caso, bienvenidos, me acompañan, luego os presentaré, o nos presentaremos, mejor dicho, el resto de compañeros de la Junta de la BAC 2023. Sabéis que vamos a empezar haciendo una brevísima, no nos vamos a prolongar mucho, o a extender mucho, una brevísima introducción sobre qué es la BAC 2023 para los que no conozcáis la BAC, pues deciros lo que es. Y para los que ya conocíais la BAC, pues hay alguna pequeña novedad con respecto a la actividad y cómo vamos a desarrollar la actividad en el año 2023. Así que, si me permitís, pues doy comienzo. Para los que no lo conocéis, o para los que no conozcáis la BAC, sabed que la BAC existe desde el año 2016. Se empezó su actividad, se hizo público y la BAC empezó realmente como lo que veis aquí, ¿no? Como una asociación de empresas preocupadas por la rápida evolución de los mercados y por mantenerse adaptables. La agilidad empezaba a coger fuerza ya desde años atrás, pero en las grandes corporaciones realmente hacía falta un poco de apoyo y no existía realmente ninguna entidad que diera apoyo al concepto de Business Agility hace 7 años. Ahora ya pues todo está mucho más extendido. Durante este tiempo la BAC ha hecho muchas cosas. Ha producido muchas cosas, aquí os pongo un par de ejemplos. El famoso bacómetro que se lanzó en 2018 como una especie de radar monitor de todo lo que, bueno, del estado de la agilidad en España. Esta otra imagen que tenéis aquí pues corresponde a un vídeo que se lanzó en 2020. Se han hecho eventos anuales, muchos eventos anuales desde el año 2016. Aquí hay fotos de algunos. Empezando por el de abajo a la derecha que tenéis 2016, 17, 18, las ediciones 2019 y la edición de 2020, no, perdón, la de 2020 y 2021 fueron online, toda la actividad de la BAC y como sucedió en muchas otras empresas, la actividad de la BAC pues migró a remoto. Y bueno, en general siempre se ha estado buscando esto, desarrollar el concepto de agilidad empresarial o solucionar problemas de escalado ágil en empresas normalmente grandes, porque son las que, bueno, más dificultades tenían para hacer estos escalados. Y este fue el contexto en el que nació la BAC y en el que, como muchos, sé que algunos de los que habéis participado que en ediciones o en eventos anteriores estáis conectados, lo conocéis de sobra. Diría que casi mejor que yo. Así que, bueno, y para los que no lo conozcáis, pues esta es un pequeño resumen de la actividad. Ahora hemos heredado de estas 6 personas que son los que, bueno, Isaías Reina fue el primer presidente de la BAC, después siguió siendo miembro de la Junta. Bueno, pues Adolfo Menéndez, Carolina Bubar, Eduardo Méndez Polo, Fernando Ortego, Isaías Reina y Juan Fontán fueron hasta el año 2022 los que siguieron poniendo en marcha la BAC, los que siguieron dando cuerda a la BAC. Y en el año 2022 hubo un evento en octubre que estuvo muy, muy bien. No sé si alguno de los que estáis coincidisteis también en aquel evento, donde participó Cliff Berg, el padre de Agile 2, y estuvo contando pues las novedades sobre Agile 2, en el que parecía que iba a ser el último evento de la BAC. Pero después del éxito que tuvo este evento y de ver un poco el feedback de la gente, pues parecía como que tenía sentido seguir empujando y algunos motivados, no sé si llamarnos locos, algunos motivados, propusimos a la Junta continuar la actividad y ellos muy amablemente pues decidieron que sí, que le tenía mucho cariño a esto y que estaban encantados de que otras personas siguiéramos con la actividad de la BAC. Y por eso estamos aquí presentándoos que continuamos con la BAC. La BAC ha cambiado. Bueno, primero a ellos hay que agradecerles todo lo que han hecho y agradecerles que hayan querido traspasar la BAC a una nueva junta. La BAC solía tener otro logotipo, que es el que muchos conocéis. Ahora, la BAC hemos cambiado el logotipo también para escenificar, no solo porque seamos caras nuevas, porque bueno, la Junta ya pues cambió en su momento, sobre todo porque ahora la BAC pues tiene otro carácter o queremos darle otro carácter quizá más abierto y más pues adecuado a la situación actual, ¿no? Entonces, podemos decir que back is back, la BAC ha vuelto, pero la BAC ha vuelto con un propósito igual, pero con unas formas quizá un poco diferentes. La actividad que vamos o que queremos realizar en la BAC es más abierta y para que tenga mayor difusión, mayor repercusión. Bueno, pues queremos simplemente y os vamos a invitar a todos los que queráis que os registréis para que estéis al tanto de toda la actividad que vamos a ir desarrollando en la BAC. Y tenemos un plan inicial, que es el que veis aquí. Sabéis que el plan inicial existe, en la agilidad se planifica, pero luego nos podemos ir adaptando según cuál sea la realidad. Los que hemos iniciado la actividad de la BAC 2023, bueno, pensamos que el foco y donde tiene sentido hablar ahora mismo en cuanto a agilidad corporativa es hablar de agilidad más allá de TI, hablar de áreas transversales, de esas áreas que todavía les está costando entrar y sobre todo, bueno, pues dar siguientes pasos en liderazgo, en la dificultad que existe en los cambios de cultura a gran escala y en los procesos de recursos humanos que realmente gestionan personas y que pueden actuar de habilitadores para que las transformaciones sucedan. Este es el foco inicial que queremos poner en nuestra actividad. Por eso hoy Leybourn nos va a empezar a hablar de liderazgo, que es la primera palabra que tenemos ahí, siguientes pasos en liderazgo, y Evan nos va a hablar de liderazgo ágil. Este es nuestro plan inicial. Yo he empezado a hablar sin presentarme porque quería llegar hasta aquí y explicaros o que os contemos entre todos, 30 segunditos cada uno, quiénes somos y doy el paso a Patricia Iglesias para que se presente.
Gracias, Pepe. Bueno, gracias a todos por estar aquí y como queremos que la BAC sea algo de personas y para personas, os voy a hablar de mí, pero a título personal. En lo profesional, pues tenéis mi currículum en LinkedIn. En lo personal, pues deciros que tengo 2 hijas universitarias ya, que mi marido cocina estupendamente bien, que me encantan las series y que me considero una aprendiz eterna, ¿no? Con lo cual, me gusta dedicar mi tiempo libre, pues todos los años me cojo alguna asignatura suelta de psicología para complementar mi perfil de ingeniera. También estoy aprendiendo a pintar, llevo años pintando cuadros al óleo y lo disfruto muchísimo. Y bueno, pues cuando me ofrecieron estar en la BAC, en la Junta, pues decidí que sí, porque en ese afán de seguir aprendiendo, creo que es una oportunidad de, ahora que la queremos hacer abierta, de que todos vosotros podáis venir a contar en algún momento vuestras experiencias, vuestros conocimientos o a escuchar los de los demás. Y yo si estoy aquí para verlo, pues aprenderé también de lo que nos contéis, ¿no? Y bueno, Lorena, ¿nos cuentas tú también un poquito quién eres?
Claro que sí, gracias Patricia, bienvenidos a todos. Bueno, yo soy Lorena, yo estoy casada con Jesús, estoy muy contenta de que en las próximas semanas vamos a celebrar nuestras bodas de plata. Tenemos 2 hijos, Tania y Andrés, y bueno, os comparto que una de mis pasiones es el baile, me encanta, trato de practicarlo lo más posible. Y yo soy Agile Believer desde hace mucho tiempo, ¿vale? Me ha interesado mucho el desarrollo de las habilidades personales, por lo cual también me formé como coach. Entonces, es otra faceta también que tengo. Y justamente lo que quiero aportar aquí en la BAC es, pues, que demos ese paso que hemos mencionado para poder avanzar hacia una transformación cultural que sea más sostenible. Así que, pues, eso. Esa soy yo. Y vamos a conocer ahora a mi compañero Flavio.
Gracias, Lorena. Vale, soy Flavio Marieto. Como puedes notar, un brasileño que habla portuñol, perdona, ¿vale? Vivo en España desde 2019. Estoy casado con Silvia desde hace 25 años también, Lorena. Fíjate, sí. Y tengo un hijo de 24 años que se llama Pedro. Un nombre muy español, y está terminando la carrera de económicas. Estamos enamorados de la cultura española, de verdad, de la comida. Es un país maravilloso, ¿no? Y donde incluso monto en bici, ¿vale? Con los amigos de la urbanización en la que vivo, aquí en Boadilla del Monte, ¿vale? Soy un apasionado de la agilidad desde 2010, hace tiempo, y tengo muchas ganas de aportar mi granito de arena aquí con la comunidad Agile en España. He visto que hay un montón de gente aquí que conozco conectado, incluso de otros países, de México, de España y de Brasil. Vale, seguro que aprenderé mucho con mis compañeros de la Junta y con todos los otros, ¿vale? Como mis compis comentaron, estamos aquí para evolucionar junto con vosotros. Una expresión muy española, vamos codo con todos, ¿vale? Y ahora doy el paso a Pablo. Porfa, Pablo.
Gracias, Flavio. Pues yo soy Pablo Grueso y no tengo tanta suerte como mis compañeros de la Junta de la BAC, porque mis hijos tienen 4 años y año y medio, así que estoy durmiendo muy poco en esta fase de mi vida, que sumado al trabajo intenso que siempre es el de tecnología, pues me deja muy poquito tiempo para hobbies. De hecho, me lo paso también en mi trabajo en tecnología, que lo considero mi hobby. Todo el tiempo que no estoy trabajando estoy estudiando algo relacionado con tecnología, leyendo. Así que de una u otra forma estoy todo el tiempo rodeado de tecnología. Y algo que no me puedo negar jamás, porque no puedo, mi personalidad no me deja, es a participar en eventos de comunidad, en empujar a comunidades de conocimiento, siempre que me dan la oportunidad de participar, siempre que vemos la oportunidad de empujarlo, pues siempre estoy ahí. Así que todo el tiempo que no estoy cuidando niños, dando potitos y cambiando pañales o leyendo temas de tecnología, pues estoy colaborando con iniciativas como esta fantástica de la BAC, que hoy le queremos dar un grandísimo empujón. Y ahora, Pepe, cuéntanos.
Sí, gracias. Hay que decir que hoy es el cumpleaños de Sergi Aceves. No voy a decir cuántos años cumple porque no tengo su permiso, pero es una cifra muy bonita. Así que, bueno, pues supongo que muchos lo conoceréis y si no, pues lo conoceréis en otra ocasión. Bueno, yo soy Pepe. No me bautizaron como Pepe, me bautizaron como José Antonio, pero todo el mundo me llama así desde que tengo 15 años. Así que, bueno, pues soy Pepe González. Estuve casado mucho tiempo, ya no lo estoy, pero sigo teniendo una relación maravillosa con mi exmujer. Tengo un hijo de 15 años con quien juego al frontenis y puedo deciros que tengo la suerte, yo sí tengo suerte, de... Siempre me han apasionado 3 cosas, que es la informática, la docencia y las personas, y a lo largo de mi vida pues he podido trabajar siempre en todo esto. He trabajado como ingeniero informático, he dado muchos cursos y en la última etapa de mi vida, desde que soy coach, hará aproximadamente 7 u 8 años, pues, bueno, pues estoy más en relación con las personas, aunque antes también lo estaba, también a través de los equipos y haciendo mis pinitos como Scrum Master hace más años. Y bueno, pues afortunadamente mi trabajo actual me permite dedicarme a la informática o a la gestión de TI, me permite dedicarme a la docencia y, por supuesto, a las personas. Y lo que espero de la BAC pues, es aprender mucho y contribuir con todas mis fuerzas y humildad y lo que pueda, si podemos mover un poquito más a que todo el mundo sea un poquito más ágil y abrazar este concepto de Business Agility, aprendiendo entre todos, pues estaré muy feliz. Antes de dar paso a Flavio y ya que comience Evan, os comento una cosa más. Bueno, tenéis aquí un código QR que también, bueno, os podéis suscribir desde la página web de businessagilitycorp.com. Si queréis ahora mismo o queréis estar al día de noticias, pues nos podéis seguir. Podéis recibir la newsletter. Y bueno, pues tenemos cuentas en Twitter, en LinkedIn, a las que iremos dando cariño. Y bueno, y hay que decir que aunque esto no es un evento para hacer teletienda de ningún tipo, ni de personas ni de empresas, pero bueno, hay que reconocer que la actividad de la BAC se viene sosteniendo desde el año 2021 por un patrocinador, que en este caso es Tecnofor. Y es todo lo que os queríamos contar. Animaros a que os apuntéis a la newsletter, que estéis atentos a todos los eventos que vayamos lanzando, que serán abiertos. Y dicho esto, pues hemos terminado. Flavio, puedes presentar a Evan y el resto desaparecemos. Que disfrutéis.
Gracias, Pepe. Solo comentando más algunas cosas en español y después cambio al inglés. Si vamos a tener la presentación de Evan, ¿vale? Y al final, preguntas y respuestas, ¿vale? Entonces, por favor, utilizar el chat a su derecha. Si tú has maximizado la pantalla, no van a ver la presentación, ¿vale? Y Pepe, hay que quitar tu pantalla, por favor. Y si puedes hacer la pregunta ya en inglés, me facilita la vida, pero no pasa nada. Puede poner en portugués y en español también. So, let me switch to English. As I can see, Evan already wake up. So good morning, Evan. Sorry to be very early talking to you, but as you know, it's a pleasure for us. So before you give your presentation, let me introduce you, Evan Leybourn. Of course, everybody knows you, but you are a founder and CEO of the Business Agility Institute, very connected with our purpose as BAC, an international membership body to both champion and support the next generation of organizations. Companies that are agile, innovative, and dynamic, perfectly designed to thrive in today's unpredictable markets, as well as leading the Business Agility Institute. Evan is also the author of Directing the Agile Organization in 2012, and No Projects, a Culture of Continuous Value in 2018. So Evan, the audience is yours. Have fun. And again, thank you very much to be very early with us. It's a pleasure for us, an honor to have you at the first session of this year. See you at the end.
Thank you very much, Flavio. I was going to say good morning. Good morning for me. Good afternoon and good evening for you. I do apologize for my lack of Spanish. Unfortunately, Australia is a very long way away from Spain, so there aren't many Australians who speak Spanish. But please obviously bear with me, and if there are any questions, please add them into the chat. Please feel free to ask them throughout, and I will try and address them throughout this conversation, throughout this presentation. But let me start, before I share my screen, before I share any slides, let me start with a story, a fable, in fact. This is a story of agility from many, many thousands of years ago. A very large oak was uprooted by the wind and thrown across a stream. It fell amongst some reeds, which it thus addressed. I wonder how you, who are so light and weak, are not entirely crushed by these strong winds. The reeds replied, you fight with the wind, and consequently, you are destroyed. While we, on the contrary, bend beneath the least breath of air, and therefore remain unbroken and escape. That's from Aesop's Fables. It's the oak and the reeds. And it is one of the earliest expressions of the importance of agility that I've ever seen. Business agility is not new. We have been teaching this to our children through these fables for thousands of years. The need to adapt, the need to bend with the wind, the ability for an individual and through individuals, an organization to create an environment where change is not something to be afraid of, but rather something to embrace. Change is something to use to your competitive advantage, to use to your customers' competitive advantage. Now, when we do talk about business agility, and if you'll excuse me, I'm just going to share my screen. When we talk about business agility, we often talk about it in the context of change. Now, I don't need to tell you that change is accelerating. If you haven't figured that out by now, there's not a lot of hope for you. Now, whether that change is an opportunity or an obstacle is up to you. Now, I lied a moment ago. I said that change was the only thing that matters, but there is another thing that matters. We spend more time working than any other part of our lives. That actually includes spending time with family. This is not a value judgment. This is just a statement of fact. If anything, we're actually working less now than we were 100 years ago. So if work is one of the biggest parts of our lives, it should also be one of the best parts of our lives. Anything less is a waste of human potential. Now, the good news is business agility and creating human organizations go together. You get people who find value in their work. You will find these people who can do what needs to be done and change when they need to change. The bad news is that most companies...
Yes? Evan, sorry. We cannot see your screen. Is totally black. Sorry.
Okay, it's up on the window for... Let me stop presenting and try again. 1 second. All right. Is that better?
Yeah, now we can see. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. So the good news is that human business, finding people who have passion and business agility who can change go hand in hand. The bad news is that most companies are terrible at this. It's not that these companies are evil or bad. They're just incompetent. Decades of inertia, conflicting priorities, arrogance and ego in business leaders. A business will, someone will make a mistake inside an organization 20 years ago. And the manager at the time says, make sure that never happens again. And 20 years later, no one even remembers what the mistake was. No one even remembers. In fact, all the people who were involved have long since left the organization. But that policy, that procedure stays. And 20 years of paying for that additional governance, that additional bureaucracy creates organizations that are incapable of embracing change. That creates organizations that don't even know why they work the way that they do. It's just, we've always worked that way. And 20 years ago, there might have been a reason, but the world has moved on. And most organizations do not, unfortunately, have the ability, or for that matter, the will to make the changes that are necessary. Now, I don't want to talk specifically around business agility. This talk is talking more about agile leadership. So I want to talk about the role of a leader in creating agile organizations. I will, however, cover some basic points to make sure that everyone here who's listening has a foundational understanding of what we mean by business agility. So let me get back to the key point, or one of the key points. Business agility is not the same as agile. Business agility is not the same as agile business, agile marketing, or agile HR. All of these are good. Agile can help create business agility. It is a stepping stone. Agile marketing or agile HR or an agile PMO are stepping stones towards business agility. But business agility is what happens when an organization has agility in the whole. And that's sometimes difficult. Unfortunately, that is very difficult. So let's talk about change from a leadership standpoint. Now, I'm not talking about business agility itself. I'm talking about managing change, because change is going to happen to you, to your business, whether you want it to or not. Like I said, it's either an opportunity or an obstacle, and that's your choice. But sustaining change is difficult. It is hard. We talk about change very often in the context of business impact or creating positive business outcomes. But it's also about employee health and welfare, because it is exhausting. It is hard. As a leader, you need to ask yourself, or you need to ask your peers, your fellow leaders, can the people in your organization fully engage, bring their whole self into the business? Are they able to take ownership of outcomes? Are they able to take ownership of the change? And are they able to maintain a healthy balance? Because if they can't do these four things, they cannot sustain the change. And this is constantly dynamically moving. It's in flux. An individual who today is fully engaged, fully present, takes ownership, and has a healthy balance, tomorrow might reach a point where it's too much. Step back a little bit, and that's okay, because they'll step back in. This is a constant movement. This is a dance, a tango between the individual and the organization, where sometimes one person is leading and another time another person is leading, and that's okay. As a leader, you've got to be able to watch your people and your teams to ensure that they can sustain change and sustain the impact of change. Because you cannot have business agility with a workforce who is overwhelmed and overworked. At the same time, I'm not saying that your workforce has to be underworked. Right? No, ownership means accountability. Ownership means taking pride and drive. Right? But as a leader, you need to know when someone is reaching their limit, where the change and their adaptability is starting to reach a breaking point, and then you need to help them step back a little bit. And then once they've recovered, once they've got a little bit of health, a day, a week or two, then they come back. Right? And I'm not talking about they leave the organization or they take leave. That's one way of doing it. It may just be that they're not on the front line of change. It may just mean putting them in a space where they have stability for a couple of weeks. And then you create a space for them to thrive in that change again. Now, the key here is, in order to sustain change, people in the organization need these 4 things. They need alignment. Everyone in the organization, at a minimum, everyone in their team, function and organization need to be aligned to a common goal, a common purpose. If you are working in opposition to another team or another function, that tension, mental tension and organizational tension is stressful. It's difficult. Without alignment, people cannot sustain change. They cannot create business agility. Really good example. Look at your organizational KPIs or OKRs, what you're being measured by. Let's pretend for a moment you're in the your OKRs are customer oriented and throughput oriented. We want to deliver the right product to our client as quickly as possible. But your security function, their KPIs are in conflict to yours very often. They want stability and security. And they achieve this by slowing you down, by saying, oh, you can't do that. We have to go through these 10 layers of approvals before a change can move into towards the customer. Because our KPIs as security say that we need to ensure these things are met. And so at a very fundamental level, organizations are often misaligned. Now, I'm not saying that the security team should not have KPIs that focus on the health and security of the organization. That's their job. I'm not saying that the technology function shouldn't have measures and KPIs that relate to the speed in which you can create value for your customer. What I'm saying is you need to find a way of harmonizing those. And so security and technology work in conjunction together for a common outcome. The second thing that individuals need is autonomy. Dan Pink talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose as the 3 things that an individual needs to be happy, right? To get meaning in their life. And he's right. And in a business agility context, we talk about autonomy as a necessary element for individuals to own change. And if they own change, if they are accountable for managing that change and adapting to change, then they can sustain it because they're accountable for their own pace. Now, one of the big problems that organizations have is that we talk about autonomy, we talk about ownership, but we don't actually teach people how to take ownership. And it's a really big problem. We teach our leaders how to delegate. We invest millions of dollars in leadership training. We teach them how to delegate and how to create environments where they can delegate cross-functional, multidisciplinary teams. We change measures and adopt OKRs. But we always forget that you can't delegate to people who can't take ownership, who don't have a sense of autonomy, who don't know how to be autonomous. But we don't train this. And so we have leaders who get frustrated because you're trying to delegate to teams who can't be delegated to. Instead, or not instead, as well, you should be, as leaders, one of the key skills around Agile leadership is, as a leader, you need to invest the time to teach your teams to develop the skill of ownership, of being held to account, of autonomy. And there's a whole, I could spend an hour just on this topic because it touches on psychological safety and safe to fail, but I don't have time to go into all of those different facets. The third element that as a leader you need to start investing in is to create trust. Now here I talk about being trusted and trustworthy. This is a key distinction, and an organization needs both. I'll give you an example from my career. 6 years ago, I worked for a large consulting firm. And like all large organizations, their travel policy was bureaucratic, but logical. It boiled down to two things: get your manager's approval before you fly and buy the cheapest flight. That makes sense. This policy is designed to save the organization money. Now, here's the challenge. My boss was a busy person. And if it was Q4, you had to get the country manager's approval, which was even harder. I was a senior leader in the organization. I was running the Asia Pacific practice. And my boss was the global head. Now, I want you to just think for a moment about the implications. This is a policy designed to save the organization money. I had to fly for a customer to make money. Now, I put in the request, and sometimes it would take approval. Now, in fact, there were a couple of times I got approval to fly the day before. Here's the thing. I never once got declined. Not once in my entire career there. Only 2 years, to be fair, but still. Now, this tells you that I was trustworthy and never once got declined. But the organizational systems did not trust me. I was not trusted. My boss trusted me, but the systems of the organization did not. So it didn't matter what my boss felt. I was not. No one acted. They couldn't act as though I was trusted, even though I was trustworthy and had demonstrated to be trustworthy. And this organization was spending 3 times, sometimes 4 times what that flight could have cost, all because their governance systems were based on the fact that we don't trust anybody. Now, I'm going to compare that to Netflix's travel policy. It's 5 words. Act in Netflix's best interest. Now, Netflix isn't stupid. If you buy a flight for $10,000, you're going to get called into your manager's office and you're going to be asked to explain. And that's stressful. One of 2 things, really. One is you made a mistake. And you know what? Sure, you might have spent on that one flight 3 times more than you were meant to, but you're not going to make that mistake again. And so the cost of the mistake is exponentially lower than the cost of compliance. Way more. Second thing, it was legitimate. You're meeting with a major client an hour after you land. It's the only flight that's available. And you know what? As your boss, thank you. You did the right thing. Because if you had to wait for approval, maybe there would have been no flights. And that would have been a worse outcome. So we create a space where people are trusted and trustworthy, but we're also not stupid about it and we're not blind, right? We obviously look for those mistakes, but just because someone makes a mistake doesn't mean that we shouldn't trust them. It means they made a mistake. Someone who makes a mistake 3, 4, 5 times, there we have a different problem. And realistically, at a certain point, this person may not be suitable for the organization. But one mistake is a good thing. And in fact, should be recognized and rewarded because mistakes are learning experiences. There are all there that create failure KPIs where an individual, a leader, is partly given their bonus based on what they tried that failed. Not what they tried and succeeded, not meeting all their numbers, but trying something new that didn't work. And the organizations that have adopted this, and there aren't many, there's only 2 or 3 that I know of, but it's a really interesting dynamic. As like people will ask me, it's like, so Evan, what if someone doesn't fail in that quarter? Well, there's 2 things. One is they're either lying to you or they're not trying. They're not trying hard enough. Because if you're trying new things, if you're innovating, you will fail. And maybe you'll succeed, of course. We want you to succeed. But if you succeed, then it's like, all right, try something different, try something new, try something bigger, go bigger, try more. And you'll eventually do something that doesn't work. And that's the culture that they want to create. They want to create this safe to try attitude, this culture of we trust you to try something, knowing that it's going to fail, and we want to incentivize. Technically, they're not incentivizing failure, they're incentivizing learning, which is the key here. It's not about failure, it's about the learning from the failure. But they make it safe to fail by creating that space. The 4th element that people need is sustainable pace. For those of you who come from an Agile background, you'll be familiar with this. This is one of the principles of the Agile Manifesto, but this is a key element for creating business agility and sustaining change in organizations. What I say to some of our members, especially our consulting, what we call our enabling members, companies who are consulting firms or training firms, you can't be agile if you don't run a bench. In other words, if people are working at 100% capacity all the time, or worse, over 100% capacity all the time, then when a new opportunity emerges, you don't have capacity to take advantage of it. In fact, if you're working at capacity the whole time, no one's even looking for those new opportunities because there's no chance to do so. So we need to create work environments where people can work sustainably every day, every work day of that year, and create high positive business and continuously create high and positive business outcomes, business impacts. So these are some of the key elements around why and how to sustain change. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that I wanted to touch a little bit more on business agility and not just on leadership. So I want to start by defining what is business agility. Now, this is an industry standard definition. It's been adopted by multiple organizations. Business agility is a set of organizational capabilities, behaviors, and ways of working. It is not a framework, a system, a method. It's not something that you do, it's how you act. And it is not something done by one function, it's done by the whole organization. It is these capabilities, behaviors, and ways of working that affords an organization, your business, with the freedom, the flexibility, and the resilience to achieve its purpose, to serve your customer. And the magic 6 words, no matter what the future brings. This is it. Those are the magic 6 words for business agility. No matter what the future brings. In fact, to be honest, those 6 words could be the definition. It's enough. All of the frameworks, all of the systems, all of the transformations mean nothing. The question, do you have people who can do what needs to be done and change when they need to change? Nothing else matters. That's it. The devil's in the details, right? What needs to be done? Who do you need to work with to get it done? When do you know you need to change? Who has the most information? Who can make a decision? When do you know when you're doing the wrong thing, or that the thing that was right is now wrong? Not to mention that there's really no right or wrong. It's just continuously balancing tensions and constraints. You're making trade-off decisions. And again, as leaders, this is the key. This is your job. Your job is to make those trade-off decisions. So creating an organization that can achieve its purpose, no matter what the future brings, is hard. And let's just take a moment and consider your customer. Your customer of today may not be your customer of tomorrow. I have a friend, a very good friend, who was doing some consulting for a television shopping network in America. And their customer base is literally dying. Their customer base is 60 and above on average. Now, problem is that all the young people aren't watching network television. They're not tuning in to the television shopping channel. And I don't know how old some of you are. Some of you may not even you may not even know that there was such a thing as a television shopping network, right? Or networks. There's like 20 of them in America alone. So this is, for them, they went down an agile path because they wanted to increase sales, they wanted to be more dynamic, and they engaged an agile sales expert, my friend. Now, the problem is, and I'm not going to name the company because this isn't a good story and I don't have permission to name the company, but the problem is that their leaders couldn't get their head around the fact that they had to change. It wasn't just a matter of delivering to their customers better. Right? They were doing the first part of this. They were achieving their purpose and they wanted Agile to achieve their purpose better, but they couldn't understand the last 6 words because the future for them had already arrived and they hadn't and didn't know how to move. Unfortunately, my friend was unable to get them to go down this path and figure out strategies to sell via TikTok or whatever else. I'm not an expert in these things. But the leaders in this organization were so fixed on these are our customers that they didn't have the vision to think about who are their customers tomorrow and the next day and the years after that. And this organization may not last another 5 years because these are the problems. Now, the other thing to note around business agility is that we have 4 key principles. Now, this is important to understand because we're a research organization. We undertake studies. We profile companies. We can come into an organization and we can benchmark you against thousands of companies around the world. We've done studies on different facets of business agility. But for us to be able to study business agility, we need to be able to have an understanding of how to measure it. These 4 principles underpin all of our research. The first principle, that business agility is a continuum and not a state. There is no magic point where you can say, today we are agile, now we have agility. All you can ever say is, today we have more agility than we did yesterday. Hopefully that's the direction you're going, because it could be the other way as well. The second principle is that there's a range of agility, a range of excellence simultaneously inside an organization. The lived experiences of any individual is not and can never be representative of the entire organization, which means for us to say your organizational agility averages 3.9 makes no sense, because it's not about the average. It's about the range. It's about the variance across the organization. And organizations that reduce that variance actually do better in their transformations than those that try and bring the average up. Right? Because as you try and bring the average up, if you leave those down here and those up here, if you're not moving them, right, then you're actually just stretching the organization. You're creating this tension. The third principle is that there are thousands of ways of achieving business agility. There is no framework for business agility, and there never can be a framework for business agility. An organization is a complex adaptive system. I can create frameworks for processes, your budgeting process, or your software development process, or your marketing process. I can document those processes. I can copy another organization's process and organization. I can install that process into my organization with various degrees of success. It's not quite as simple as that. But an organization is a complex adaptive system. You can't document it. By the time you just finish describing the organization, it's moved on. And in fact, just the act of documenting it changes it. Cause and effect are unclear. One day you pull a lever, you do something, and one thing happens. The next day you pull exactly the same lever and something else happens. An organization is a parade of people. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of individuals, all with their own hopes and dreams and desires, and ultimately all moving in slightly different directions. Now, this then brings us to the fourth principle, that if it's not frameworks, at the end of the day, it's all about behavioral change. The only way that you can measure, the only way that you can create sustainable change is to change individual and systemic behaviors across the organization. That's it. That's all you have. Nothing else matters, which is a challenge, but it is what it is. So I'm going to pause there, and I've got about 20 minutes left, but I want to see if there are any questions in the chat or anything that that I've raised or has come up which you would like to understand any deeper. So I can see some questions here. All right, so Pepe, when you talk about alignment to sustain change, does that also include alignment in thinking, or is it enough to align objectives? You need to align objectives. You shouldn't align thinking. You actually want a diversity of thoughts and diversity of thinking for individuals across the organization, because they will have ideas that you won't. So alignment is around goals and objectives. Think of it, we often use the metaphor of an organization being a big ship, an oil tanker. But a better metaphor is to think of an organization as a fleet of small boats. Hundreds of boats, right, racing along a bay. If you need to turn that fleet, then you need to turn not one boat very slowly, but 1,000 boats. And we do this by creating alignment to a common goal, a common objective, a common outcome. But we should not be aligning thinking. We actually want diverse thinking. Alonso, obviously leadership is one of the key enablers for business agility. What are the other relevant enablers in your opinion? Okay, so this is actually a really good question, and I'm going to answer it twice with two different answers, because it partly depends on what you mean by enabler. So when we have been studying companies for 5 or 6 years, 5 years, and one of the things that we found is that there are 3 key predictive indicators for business agility. The first is, and I should note, these 3 have been the top predictive indicators for the last 4 years. The order changes. So some years it's number 1, some years it's number 3, but these 3 have always been the top. The first one is a culture of relentless improvement or continuous improvement. The second is adaptive finance or adaptive funding models, moving the money. Are you able to move money to where it needs to be, when it needs to be? Or are you tied into an annualized budget cycle that you have to plan for 6 months ahead or 12 months ahead, which means that you need to make a decision on where money needs to be 18 months ago. And I don't know about you, but 18 months ago, I had no idea what today was going to look like. I don't just mean I didn't know I was going to be giving a presentation. That was in the middle of a pandemic, that things were weird. Right? 18 months is a long time in business, and if you can't move money, you can't have business agility. The third key predictive indicator is to align work to value streams. Now, this is a key element where we actually want individuals, we want to create cross-functional and multidisciplinary teams where the flow of value through the system aligns to how the customer wants to work with you. And this talks to structural agility, and there's a few other elements. Now, I said I was going to answer the question twice. The second set of enablers are what we call the levers of business agility. These are the things that have a cascading impact on the organization. The first is, with apologies to Eli Goldratt, Evans' theory of agile constraints. It basically says that in an organization, there's a constraint to a system. So my daughter made this little Lego car for me. Let's say that you are building cars on production line. If it takes you 5 minutes to install the engine and 4 minutes to install the wheels, then you're only going to be rolling cars off the production line once every 5 minutes, because that's the constraint to the engine. The engine team is the constraint. No amount of transformation on any other part of the system is going to speed up your ability to produce cars. Now, the corollary to theory of constraints is that there's always a constraint. So let's say you transform the engine team and you get it down to 3 minutes. That's great. But the constraint moves to the wheel team, because the wheel team was 4 minutes. So now engine's 3 minutes, wheel is 4 minutes. Cars are rolling off now, not every 3, but every 4 minutes. With apologies to Eli Goldratt, the originator of the concept of theory of constraints, I talk about Evans' theory of agile constraints. An organization can only be as agile as its least agile function, and that's not technology anymore for most organizations. So one of the key enablers for an organization is to find the constraint, identify the constraint, and focus your transformational energy on that constraint until you release the constraint. Then, and only then, do you move that transformational investment to the new constraint. Too many organizations fund the transformation in one function and they keep it there for 5 years. You have 10 coaches. They're amazing people. They do great work, but they're in the one space all the time. And after 6 to 9 months, they reached a point of diminishing returns. Sure, they're making those teams better, but the system has no greater agility. And this is a huge problem. So one of the key enablers is that concept of theory of constraints. Find and relieve the constraint in your for your transformation. Don't bother transforming anywhere else, and make sure you move away once that constraint is. Example, is a linear flow. An organization is a complex adaptive system, which means it's not so much you have a network of flows, which means you actually have multiple constraints. So it's not quite as simple as I've described, but the principle is the same. Find the constraint, optimize for the constraint, release the constraint. The other key enabler that we talk about is governance. Now, I spoke about that earlier when I gave the example of the audit versus approval governance in regards to the travel policy. But your organizational systems are very likely to be dragging the organization back. Most organizations have what we would class as anti-agile, not unagile, but anti-agile transformations. Anti-agile governance. Your transformation needs to be focused on changing not just the behaviors of the individual in the organization, but the governance systems inside the organization. I gave one example about travel. I'll give another one. We invest heavily in creating collaboration-based behaviors. We want to collaborate, we want teaming, we want dynamic and build those that multidisciplinary cross-functional teams. But when it comes time for performance management, like Flavio, you get a 3, and Alonso, you get a 2. Why? Because I don't have enough 3s to give my entire team. Do you think that promotes collaboration? No, that literally undermines collaboration and promotes competition, because next year, Alonso, you damn well want that 3 because you want that extra bonus. Right? And it feels unfair because you and Flavio were working on a team. You were collaborating together. You achieved the same objective, the same outcome. Why did he get a higher, why is his score more than yours? Now, I'm not talking about underperforming team members. That's a different process. But here I'm just talking about the performance management systems of the organization often undermine the intent to create a collaborative work environment. or even for that matter, a psychologically safe work environment. So this can be a big tension. So governance is, it sounds boring, but it is one of the key enablers to business agility. If you don't change your governance systems, then you'll get these behaviors and you'll have them established, and then 6 months later, they will disappear because the systems drag them back. Deming said a bad system will break a good person every time. And he was right. And he wrote that 30, 40 years ago. Next question. Describing and implementing processes based on people being unreliable is a business model for many ERP and consulting companies. How to fight against that, Pepe? Oh, you are entirely... The truth is that we can trace most of that back to scientific management and the turn of last century, because the whole premise of scientific management was we don't trust our workers. And even though scientific management itself has long since been it's outdated and abandoned, no companies do that specifically anymore. But the principle of we don't trust our workers has sort of stayed with us. So you are correct. I think a lot of it just comes down that what we're seeing is a generational change, not a transformational change, but new generations are coming in, they're being dissatisfied and they're leaving. And so companies who are trying to attract new workers are making building more trust in. And when you have organizations like Netflix who are very proud about their transparent and more trust-based governance, then it becomes very hard to compete in the war for talent. And it is a war for talent. Julio, if you face a manager that says he is agile in his management style, but his behavior shows complete opposite, how can we manage this manager? That's a really good question. And that is a tough one. So the first thing to note is an individual has all motivation is intrinsic, internal. It sits inside, which means you can't motivate somebody to change with extrinsic drivers. What you have to do is find a way of tying the change that you want into something that motivates that manager intrinsically. Are they motivated by status or power? Are they motivated by family or food? There's many different motivations. And so if you can tie it into those motivations, you can achieve anything. But if you try and force it, if you try and make them agile from the outside, it won't work because they'll push back. Another challenge you also face is who have lost all ambition. They have been, there's a concept called the Peter principle, to be promoted to your level of incompetence. And a lot of middle managers, maybe this isn't a conscious thought, maybe it's entirely subconscious, but they realize they have reached as high as they're ever going to get. They've got the most power, the most status that they're going to get in their career. The only direction they could move is down. Now, these people lose all ambition. They lose all drive to be innovative. They build walls around themselves and their team because their entire focus becomes on protecting what they've got, protecting what they have created over the last 20 years of their career. Now, the real challenge here is you need to break down those walls and you need to find a way of igniting that ambition, that drive to be better. Now that goes back to my earlier point about intrinsic motivation. But it's that one's really challenging. And sometimes, I hate to say it, sometimes that individual is no longer the right fit for the organization. Right? And it's time for them to find a new organization, one that has the culture that they want to work in. Now, the last one that I want to mention here is sometimes this is a misunderstanding, and this is the easiest because this is about education and awareness. Right? So if someone says they're an agile manager, but they don't act like it, then maybe they truly believe they are, and which means that they should have an open mindset. You should be able to show them what's necessary. The key lever, the key driver you have here are their KPIs, their OKRs, their individual scorecard. How does that leader get measured? How do you know that's a successful leader? The only way you know that that's a successful leader is if, again, you got these measures. Now, if their measures are simply how many widgets did you produce this quarter, there's no agility in that. So you need to create measures, OKRs, KPIs, scorecards, individual that look for those agile behaviors that you want to create inside those leaders. And those leaders who are striving towards this, they will realize very quickly, alongside with perhaps some education or some executive coaching, that actually I'm not as good at delegating as I thought. I delegate work, not outcomes. So, okay, we need to change that. You measure things like how many steps of approval, how many approvals does that manager do on a given day or week? And it should be as few as possible. You might measure how many handoffs in the system that this manager is responsible for. Again, the fewer handoffs, the better. You might measure team performance, employee engagement. You might look at a whole bunch of different behavioral measures. Now, I'm out of time to really go into what are the behaviors, but what I want to very quickly share is, if you can let me share my screen again. As an organization, we are as I said, we're a research organization. One of the things that we developed was what we call the domains of business agility. Now, there we go. This is the latest version of the domains of business agility. There are 18 capabilities. There are 5 domains: engaged culture, responsive customer centricity, people first leadership, flexible operations, and value-based delivery. Under those 5 domains, there are 18 capabilities. The capabilities are what your organization is trying to achieve. These are the things that, the question is, what can you do with agility? So think of these as the goals, or some of the goals that you're trying to create. But underneath is 84 behaviors, and I'm out of time. Flavio, yes.
Your screen is black again. It's not showing.
No, black again. I thought I got that right. All right. I am out of time anyway, so I will share a link to the domains in the chat, and everyone can see that. You can read that. Now, the current version of the domains with all of the behaviors is only in English. It hasn't been translated into Spanish yet. The previous version is in Spanish, but it doesn't have those 84 behaviors. So I would recommend just focusing on the new domains.
Great. Evan, if you have time, we can stay more few minutes, 5 minutes, up to you.
Of course, as long as people would like. So were there any particular questions? There's more questions I couldn't get to, but were there any particular questions that you wanted me to look at?
Yeah, good.
All right. Many leaders focus on keeping their power and managing their egos. So I spoke about the Peter principle and the fact that a lot of people don't. A lot of people build those walls. So what is happening? So there are 4 generations in the workforce right now. In some organizations, already 5. Right? That culture clash is happening and will continue to happen. So it's not about it as like what will happen. It is happening.
It's happening.
Now, the reality is that there's a saying I like to quote: change your organization or change your organization. A lot of these young people are choosing to go to the best of the young generation are choosing to go to those organizations that they want to work for. Right? Even though right now, like there's economic uncertainty around the world, unemployment rates are low, which means someone looking for work has choice. They can go to 10 different companies and they're picking the companies that they want. So this generational change, the clash is happening, but this is a war of attrition. Right? The companies that don't adapt will not hire the best talent, and they will be outcompeted by those organizations that do have that culture and do attract the best talent. Now, that out competition isn't going to be in a year, it might be 10 years, but it is going to have an impact. So I don't think we need to worry about a clash of cultures because it's already happening. We don't need to worry about companies. Like, a company will change or everyone will move on. They will change, and it's harsh to say, but not every organization will survive the next 10 years. And to be blunt, nor should they. Everything has a natural end, including companies. So this is one of those areas where if a company cannot engage with, cannot work with the next generation, then they haven't earned the right to work in the marketplace. I know that's a harsh answer, but it's the truth. You have to earn the right to exist.
Yeah, Evan. If you want to answer one more, the last one more, sure, or we can finish. Up to you.
Let's do one more.
Okay.
All right, Julio. How change can be endorsed when top management are not willing to change, but they just sell small adjustments as a huge transformation? So this is a very common problem for a lot of organizations around the world. It's a misunderstanding of what is necessary. So one of the things that we do, so we run profiles of organizations. One of the reasons we do this is that we can identify which systems are dragging you back, which behaviors are dragging you back, not the unagile, but the anti-agile, anti-business agility systems and behaviors. So really the key here is you need to be able to show the top management that it will require a systemic change, and you need to show them what the scale of that change has to be. Now, whether you do a profile with us, whether you have anyone, however you get that information, right? This is an education and this is an awareness activity for the leaders. Now, one thing I will note is that there are some small adjustments that have huge impact. And if you can't get them to think big, at least get them to think small in the right place. One of the best examples I have is organizational, like individual KPIs and OKRs. If you can embed standard KPIs that promote agility, there's an old saying, you get the behavior that you measure. Now, there are a whole bunch of unintended, so just be warned that changing KPIs will have unintended consequences. Not might, will. So the key here is that if they don't want to make systemic changes across the systems of the organization, then at least get them to do small changes in the right place, such as the performance management, KPIs, OKRs, how people are being evaluated. That's one of the most powerful small changes that you can make, because that will cascade through the entire organization like wildfire. There are others, but I'm kind of out of time to go through too many. But if you want to ping me on LinkedIn, I'm very happy to share more examples over LinkedIn.
Okay, so Evan, thank you very much. Always, you are an inspiration for us. I am a little bit jealous of you because you are more close to the weekend. Yeah.
I am indeed.
Yeah, you are on Thursday and we are finishing the Wednesday. So thank you very much. Sorry for the time. And
you always.
Nice. and always is a good story, a good content, a good knowledge. So really, you know, I am your fan. So thank you, thank you very much to be here at the first webinar that we are promoting in the Business Agility Corporation. Sorry for the same, almost the same name of your institute, but was intentional because we really believe about what you are promoting in the last few years. And again, thank you and have a good day. Enjoy your Thursday. And let's promote the Agile transformation.
All right. Well, good luck, everyone. Please, if you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn or check out businessagility.institute. And let's keep the conversation going. Please give your support to Flavio and the team at the BAC. As they said, back is back. So.
So thank you very much, Evan. Have fun and take your time.
All right. Thank you.
Y cambiando a español, muchísimas gracias a toda la audiencia. De verdad creo que ha sido un honor y espero que tenga sido muy provechoso a todos, ¿vale? Que disfrutáis de la noche, de lo que resta, ¿vale? Hasta luego. Buenas tardes, buenas noches.